"Do you need some help, ma'am?" The voice came low and steady, as the last light of the Georgia sun filtered through the pine trees, casting long, golden shadows across the narrow road. Claire Whitmore looked up from her Fanino signal and spotted a man emerging slowly from the edge of the woods. He was tall, black, mid-30s, with calm eyes and a flashlight in one hand. He kept his distance, hands raised slightly, respectful but confident. He wore a weathered denim jacket, a plain gray t-shirt beneath it, and clay-smudged work boots that said he didn't come from the city. "I'm fine," Claire answered, too quickly. Her blazer was damp with sweat and her pencil skirt clung to her legs in the rising humidity. She crossed her arms, adding with a touch of edge, "Really, I've got it under control." The man's gaze flicked toward the hood of her BMW, which was still hissing faintly from the earlier steam. Then his eyes returned to hers, not sharp, not judging, just patient. "You sure?" he asked, with the faintest smile tugging at the edge of his lips. "Because it's getting colder by the minute, and in a short skirt like that, you're gonna start regretting this roadside view real quick." Claire stiffened. She wasn't used to that kind of directness. He said it without malice or flirtation, just like someone who'd seen enough people push through bad ideas with worse pride. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, a little firmer. "All right," he replied, and gave a small nod. Then, without waiting for permission, he slowly approached the car, no her, not the driver's side, just the hood, and crouched near the front grille. "Just figured I'd take a look anyway. Don't worry, I won't charge you." "I didn't ask you to touch it," she snapped, her pulse rising. "You didn't," he agreed, popping open the hood with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 100 times. "But if this thing's about to blow out coolant or stall for good, you'll want to know before you try cranking it again." Claire opened her mouth, but said nothing. She didn't stop him. Something about the quiet confidence in his movements kept her frozen in place. No drama, no performance, just focus. He leaned in, flashlight steady in one hand, the other brushing gently along a bundle of wiring near the radiator, his brow furrowed. "Looks like your upper hose is split. You're leaking slow, but steady. If you try to drive this, you'll overheat a few miles down." Claire took a tentative step closer, arms still crossed. "And you're what, a mechanic?" "Nope," he said, standing upright and brushing his hands off on a rag from his back pocket. "Just a guy who likes machines and knows how to listen when they start complaining." She didn't reply. He turned slightly, nodding toward the trees behind him. "I live just back that way. Half a mile. If you want to wait there till someone comes or at least get warm, I've got coffee, blankets, and a porch full of quiet." Claire hesitated. "I'll stay here," she said tightly. "But, thanks." He nodded once more and stepped back, already walking toward the trail without pushing the matter further. "All right, porch light'll be on, in case you change your mind." And then he disappeared into the trees. 10 minutes later, the storm broke over her like a cold slap. Rain slammed down on the car roof, drumming hard and fast. The temperature dropped, just as he'd warned. Claire sat in the driver's seat, shivering, shoes kicked off, blazer draped over her lap, but it didn't help. The man hadn't been wrong. She watched the trailhead through the fogged windshield, saw the flicker of warm porch light blinking faintly through the trees, and finally muttering something she wouldn't repeat, she grabbed her bag and ran. The house was modest and tucked into the trees like it had grown there. Malik stood under the porch, not surprised to see her. "I changed my mind," Claire said, pushing back her wet hair. He just nodded and opened the door. "Come on in." The warmth hit her instantly. Cedar walls, soft firelight, a kettle whistling in the kitchen. Dogs padded over to inspect her gently, their tails thudding softly. No barking, no mess, just quiet presence. She didn't say a word for several moments, just stood and took it all in: the clean wooden floors, the paintings on the walls, the peace. "You rescue dogs?" she asked finally. "Some," Malik said, handing her a towel and a mug of tea. "Others just show up." She sat carefully on the couch, letting one of the dogs lay its head on her foot. "And the paintings?" she asked, eyes on the watercolor by the hearth. "I paint what I can't say," he answered. Claire sipped the tea. Let it warm her from the inside. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't in control land somehow. It didn't feel like weakness. It felt like quiet and safety. And she wasn't sure why that scared her more than the storm. Chat GPT Danoi. And perhaps, it's the simplest things: a cup of tea, a judgment-free glance, a small house tucked in the woods that touch the heart the deepest. If you've ever had a moment where letting go of strength led you to true peace, hit like to support this story. And let us know where you're listening from, because maybe, just maybe, someone nearby is also in need of a place called safety. Claire didn't sleep that night, not deeply at least. After the tea, Malik showed her to a small guest room just off the hallway. The bed was modest, the mattress firm, the sheets clean with the faint scent of lavender. A small lamp on the nightstand cast a gentle amber glow across the wooden walls, and one of the dogs, the smallest of the buncha, curly-haired mutt with one ear that flopped sideways, curled up near the door like a quiet sentinel. She lay there for hours, half listening to the crackle of firewood from the other room and the occasional sigh of wind pressing against the window panes. Her body was still, but her mind raced. It wasn't just the storm that made her uneasy, nor the fact that she was sleeping in a stranger's home. It was how quickly the stranger had stopped feeling like a stranger. Malik hadn't pushed. He hadn't pried. He hadn't tried to impress her or ask for anything. He hadn't even blinked when she nearly bit his head off by the roadside. And that, in itself, unnerved her more than any flirtation would have. He was calm, grounded, real, and she didn't trust that. Not yet. The next morning, Claire woke to the smell of brewed coffee and warm biscuits. The dogs were gone from the hallway, and outside the small window, a pale light crept through the pine trees. Her clothes from the day before had dried overnight and were folded neatly on a wooden chair in the corner. She freshened up in the compact but spotless bathroom down the hall. Everything in the house was humble but intentional. No clutter, no pretense, just a lived-in sense of care. When she stepped into the main room, Malik was at the stove, flipping something in a cast-iron skillet. The fireplace still burned low, and one of the dogs, she now knew his name was Rusty, trotted up to greet her with a slow wag. "Morning," Malik said without turning. "Hope you slept all right." Claire offered a polite smile. "Better than expected. Coffee's fresh, cream's in the fridge if you want it." She poured herself a cup, leaned against the counter, and watched him work. He moved like someone who had cooked this meal 100 times. Not rushed, not careless, just present. "You always cook like this?" she asked. "Only when I have company," he said, glancing at her with a hint of amusement. Claire gave a soft snort, sipping her coffee. "I imagine you don't get a lot of CEOs stranded in your driveway." "No," he said, smiling. "You're the first." He plated the food: scrambled eggs, biscuits, and something that looked suspiciously like sausage gravy, and set a dish in front of her on the table. She hesitated. "You didn't have to go all out." He shrugged. "Didn't. This is just breakfast." They ate mostly in silence, the good kind. The kind that didn't feel like something was missing, but rather that nothing extra was needed. Halfway through the meal, Claire set down her fork. "You knew who I was yesterday." He nodded. "But you didn't say anything. Didn't see the point." "That's rare," she said, searching his face. "Most people either want a photo or a job offer." Malik looked at her gently. "I figured you'd had enough of people expecting things from you." She blinked, not expecting that answer. Not expecting it to hit as close to home as it did. "I'm sorry I snapped at you," she said after a beat. "Back on the road. I wasn't exactly gracious." Malik gave a one-shouldered shrug. "You didn't owe me grace. Not that kind of night." Claire took another sip of coffee, then looked around. "This place, it's beautiful. Quiet. Not much, but it's mine," he replied. "Found it after I left the city. Needed space to think." "Why'd you leave?" He paused, then looked down at his plate. "World got too loud. I made some money doing something I loved. Then people started caring more about the signature than the art. I didn't like who I was becoming." Claire leaned forward slightly. "You were successful?" He nodded slowly. "As an illustrator, children's books, some gallery work, even did a mural project up in DC before everything soured. And now you just live out here, with dogs." He met her gaze. "Now I live out here with peace." Claire wasn't sure whether she envied him or pitied him. After breakfast, Malik walked her back to the road. The storm had passed, but the air was crisp and wet, filled with the smell of pine and damp earth. Her car sat where she left it, now gleaming faintly under the morning sun. He checked under the hood again, then handed her a small strip of tape and a warning. "This'll hold for about 20 miles. Just enough to get to Marietta. There's a good mechanic off Highway 278. Tell him Malik sent you. He won't overcharge." Claire nodded. "Thank you." Again. Malik stepped back, his hands in his pockets. "Safe drive, Claire." She opened the door, then paused. Something in her resisted leaving. She glanced at him, at the quiet steadiness in his face, the relaxed shoulders, the way he stood like a man who had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. "Do you?" She hesitated, then regrouped. "Do you sell your paintings anywhere?" He raised an eyebrow. "Not under my name." Well, if you ever want to," she said, pulling a card from her bag and holding it out. "I know some people." He took it but didn't look at it. "Thanks." Claire got in and shut the door, started the engine, and listened as it sputtered to life. She rolled down the window and looked up at him. "I meant what I said. They're stunning. The paintings." Malik smiled slow, sincere. "Thank you, Mom." She smiled back. "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel like I'm in church." He laughed, stepping back as she pulled onto the road. "Noted." As she drove away, Claire checked the rearview mirror once and saw him standing at the edge of the trees, the wind lifting his jacket slightly, one of the dogs by his side. She didn't know why, but something about the image stuck with her long after the road turned and the trees gave way to open highway. Back in Atlanta, everything returned like a slap. Her phone lit up with missed calls and frantic texts. Her assistant babbled about a board meeting reschedule and client expectations. Her inbox was overflowing. Her Skyline apartment looked just as she left, it gleaming, cold, empty. But something inside her didn't settle. She changed, slipped into more casual clothes, and opened her laptop. She typed in "Compassion Souls," the signature she'd seen in the corner of one of Malik's paintings, and found an entire online thread about a mysterious artist whose work depicted animals in deeply emotional, almost human ways. No name, no photo, just speculation. And suddenly, Claire Whitmore, who never had time for distractions, found herself clicking through every piece. Each painting carried something she couldn't explain. Loss, resilience, stillness, hope. That night, in the quiet of her penthouse with the lights of the city flickering outside, she thought of Malik's voice when he said, "I paint what I can't say." Claire understood that more than she wanted to admit, and though she wouldn't see him for days, her hand still lingered over the card he never looked at, hoping he'd find a reason to use it. 3 days passed, and Malik Benton didn't call, didn't email, didn't show up. Claire told herself it was expected. After all, he wasn't the type. No man who disappeared into the woods with a house full of rescue dogs and paintings signed under a pseudonym would jump at the chance to network. Still, she found herself watching her inbox, checking the missed calls list even when she knew full well it was empty of his name. It wasn't impatience, it was a curiosity that had rooted itself somewhere deeper, somewhere inconvenient. Monday afternoon, she sat in her office at Whitmore Biotech, half listening to her VP of Operations drone on about inventory delays. Outside, the Atlanta skyline pressed like glass against her floor-to-ceiling windows. Claire nodded in all the right places, offered a few clipped responses, and dismissed the meeting early. As the door clicked shut, she turned toward the window, arms crossed, her mind far from the biotech lab floors downstairs. The night at Malik's had lingered with her in strange ways. It wasn't just his silence, or the dogs, or even the painting sit, was the sense of stillness she'd found in his presence. No expectations, no performance, no sharp lines of judgment, only quiet acceptance. That kind of silence didn't just pass through you, it stayed. Especially for someone like her, who had spent the last decade making noise loud enough to drown out her own doubts. Claire stood, crossed the room, and opened the drawer of her credenza. Inside, tucked beneath a folder of regulatory drafts, was the card she'd given Malik. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, then slid it into her jacket pocket. The mechanic off Highway 278 was exactly where Malik had said he'd be. A squat cinderblock building with 2 open bays, a line of rusting cars, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Bose Repair, Honest Since, 89. Claire pulled into the lot and stepped out of her replacement Rentala sleek but generic black crossover. The sun was high, the lot dusty and quiet. A tall man in grease-streaked coveralls emerged from one of the bays, wiping his hands with a rag. "You Bo?" Claire asked. The man nodded. "That depends on who's askin'. Malik Benton sent me," she said. Bo's expression changed instantly, less guarded, more curious. "Well now, haven't heard that name in a while. How's the stubborn bastard?" Claire smiled despite herself. "Still fixing things without being asked." Bo laughed. "That sounds about right. What brings you here?" "I wanted to leave something for him," she said, pulling a small envelope from her purse. Inside was a handwritten note and a single photograph she'd taken with her phone of his painting of the blue-eyed hound above the fireplace. No captions, just a short line of thanks. Bo took the envelope. "I'll get it to him." As she turned to leave, Bo added, "You're not the first person to go looking for him, you know." Claire posed. "No? He used to be part of a bigger life. Lectures, shows, contracts. Then something happened, he won't say what. Not even to me, but he walked away from all of it. Folks keep trying to pull him back." Claire looked down at her shoes. "And?" Bo smiled kindly. "He only comes back for what feels real." Back in the city, the days piled up like pages in a folder. Claire buried herself in work clinical trials, investor meetings, employee onboarding. But every time she stepped into a quiet elevator or drove home in silence, the thought crept back in. Why hadn't he reached out? Then, on a Thursday morning, her assistant knocked softly on the office door. "There's someone here to see you. No appointment." Said his name is Malik Benton. Claire's heart didn't so much skip a beat as it seized. "Send him in," she said too quickly. The door opened, and there he was. He hadn't changed, same calm presence, same steady eyes. But he looked out of place here in the chrome and glass world of her 10th floor office. No jacket, just a dark button-up shirt and jeans. His hands were clean, but the trace of oil still clung faintly to his fingertips, as if the woods hadn't quite let him go. "I hope it's not a bad time," he said, voice low. "Not at all," Claire replied, rising to greet him. "I'm glad you came." He stepped in, closed the door behind him, and glanced around the room like he was trying to understand how she fit into all this. She gestured toward the chairs across from her desk, but he didn't sit right away. "You left something at Bo's," he said. "I wanted to say thank you. For the night, the help, the quiet." He finally took the seat. "That painting you photographed, it's one of the few I've never shown anyone." "I can see why," she said. "It stayed with me." A pause. "I looked up your alias," she added. "Compassioned Souls. I recognized more than a few of the pieces." He gave a half smile. "I always figured anonymity was safer." "Maybe," Claire said. "But hiding doesn't protect us forever. It just delays the right people from finding us." He met her eyes then, and something passed between them, not flirtation, not obligation, just something rooted in recognition. "I came here to return the favor," Malik said finally. "I know what it's like to be surrounded by noise and still feel alone. Thought maybe you could use a reminder that quiet still exists." Claire exhaled. "You have no idea." They talked for nearly an hour. About nothing. About everything. About work, dogs, paint, silence, loss. Malik told her a story about one of the dog's Maxa lab mix he'd found abandoned during a flood. Claire told him about the first clinical trial she ever led, and how a young patient once gave her a crayon drawing after recovering. It was wrinkled, silly, and priceless. She still kept it in her wallet. Finally, Malik stood. "I should get going. Just wanted to see how you were." Claire walked him to the door. "Would you ever consider showing your work? Under your name?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe, if the space was right." "I know just the space," she said, smiling. "We're opening a wellness wing at our new campus. Art, light, sound, real things. Maybe you could help make it feel less like a lab and more like stillness." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. As he reached the elevator, Claire called out gently, "Malik?" He turned. "You were right about the car," she said, her voice softening. "But more than that, you were right about me. I had been running so long, I forgot what stillness felt like. You didn't fix just the radiator. You fixed something I didn't know was broken." He nodded slowly. "Takes one to recognize one." The doors closed, and Claire was left standing in the quiet. A different kind of quiet this time. The kind she no longer feared. The following week unfolded in its usual blur strategy meetings, investor updates, supply chain headaches, but Claire felt different walking through it. Not because something had been added to her life, but because something unnecessary had been peeled away. It was subtle. She still arrived early, left late, answered emails with ruthless precision. But her mind lingered in places it hadn't before. She found herself standing longer in the company's meditation room. She spoke softer in meetings, smiled more with the interns, and in the quiet moments between her tasks, she thought about Malik. On Friday morning, she made a decision. She gathered the executive team in the 9th floor conference room to propose a change to the design of the new Whitmore Wellness Wing. The original plan featured abstract installations sourced from overseas artists. Expensive, disconnected, impersonal. Claire stood at the head of the table, her voice measured, confident. "I want to commission a local collection," she said. One focused on emotional restoration, not just visual appeal. Her chief brand officer frowned. "You mean therapy art?" Claire nodded. "Art that feels like home, like breath, like stillness." There was hesitation around the table, but no one challenged her. They didn't dare. Not when her gaze held steady like that. When the meeting ended, she sent a simple message to Malik. "I wasn't joking. I want your work in the new space. Just a few pieces to start." He didn't respond immediately, and she didn't expect him to. That night, instead of dining with potential partners, she drove. No GPS, no assistant, no driver, just instinct. The city gave way to long roads lined with whispering pine, and by the time the stars blinked overhead, she saw the soft lantern light swinging on Malik's porch. She hesitated at the gate. One of the dogs, she couldn't remember the name, maybe Dukimbled over, and barked once, low and welcoming. Then the door creaked open. Malik stepped out, wiping his hands on a paint-streaked rag. His face didn't show surprise, only warmth. "Thought I saw headlights." I wasn't planning to come," Claire admitted, pushing open the gate. He held the door open for her. "You hungry?" She hesitated. "Actually, I just wanted to see something." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, leading her inside. The house smelled like citrus and oil paint. The fireplace burned low. All the dogs were asleep in various corners. Claire stood in the middle of the living room, eyes drawn to a covered canvas against the far wall. "What's that?" she asked. "Malik hesitated. It's something I started the morning after you left." Claire walked closer. "Can I?" He nodded once. She lifted the cloth. It was a painting of a woman. Not hairnod exactly, but enough that her breath caught. The figure stood on a lonely stretch of highway, hair windswept, a storm forming in the background. But there was no fear in her face, only a quiet kind of surrender, a relief. Claire stared at it in silence. "You painted this," she whispered, "before you knew if you'd see me again." Malik stepped beside her, his voice low. Didn't matter. The stillness stayed. She turned to him, her voice soft. "I want this one in the wellness wing." "It's not finished," he said. Claire nodded. "Neither am I." That night, they didn't sleep together, not in the way stories might suggest. They simply sat on the couch, side by side, feet on the coffee table, watching the fire burn down. He told her about the mural in DC that was painted over by a developer with no taste. She told him about her mother, a nurse who died before seeing Claire graduate from MIT. He said nothing in response, just reached over and touched her hand gently. The next morning, Claire left before sunrise. No promises, no pressure, but she left her scarf hanging over the back of the chair. A week later, Malik delivered 4 paintings to the construction site of the new wing. He arrived in an old pickup, no assistance, no fanfare. The site manager called Claire, who came down immediately. She met him in the sunlight filtering through the skeletal beams of what would become the reflection room. The paintings leaned carefully against the wall, each wrapped in canvas. "Are you sure?" Claire asked as she peeled the cloth from one. A watercolor of a hound beneath a willow tree, his expression one of gentle mourning. "Yeah," Malik said, watching her. "I think this is the right space." The workers stepped back as the two of them stood in silence before the art. Then one of the electricians, a man in his 50s, silver in his beard, walked over slowly. "My wife would have loved this," he said, his voice cracking. "She passed last year. Always said dogs understood grief better than people. Claire didn't say anything. She just nodded once, and Malik turned away slightly, eyes darkening. That night, they had dinner in the city, not a restaurant. Claire cooked, burned the rice, undercooked the fish, and cursed the smoke alarm. Malik just laughed, put the pan under cold water, and said, "This is why I live in the woods." They ended up eating sandwiches on her balcony, the skyline glittering around them. Claire watched him carefully, the way he took in the world, the quiet calculation, the stillness that was never boredom, more like observation. "You're not just an artist," she said. "No? You're an anchor." Malik looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't try to change people," Claire continued. "But when they're near you, they start to change anyway." He smiled, slow and sad. "That's not always a good thing." "It is for me," she said. A pause. "I'm scared of this," Claire admitted. "I've never trusted anyone without a contract." Malik leaned back, one hand brushing against hers. "Then don't trust me," he said. "Just sit beside me until it stops feeling strange." She turned to face him, tears prickling behind her eyes for reasons she couldn't name. "What if it never stops feeling strange? Then at least we'll have company." The air was cool, and the city hummed, and they sat there until the moon rose above the tallest building. No declarations, no fireworks, just the quiet beginning of something they both knew neither of them had planned for, but maybe just maybe were finally ready to hold. The new Whitmore Wellness Wing opened quietly on a Wednesday morning. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press conference, just a few handshakes, polite nods, and a slow trickle of employees and patients wandering through the sunlit corridors. Claire had insisted on keeping it understated. "Let people find their peace in private," she told her team. "Healing doesn't need a microphone." The paintings were already mounted when she arrived. Malik had come in the night before, placing each canvas by hand. No assistants, no gallery labels, just soft spotlights that cast gentle halos around the artwork. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and eucalyptus, and the silence inside the wing was sacred. Claire walked the length of the reflection room alone, coffee in hand, eyes lingering on each painting. One depicted a sleeping fox nestled against a broken log. Another showed a dog staring at an empty shoreline. But it was the final piece, the one he'd painted after she left his house, that stopped her breath. The woman on the highway, eyes closed against the wind, her blazer caught mid-flutter, storm clouds breaking behind her. She touched the frame with her fingertips. Behind her, a voice spoke. "They look different here." Claire turned. Malik stood just inside the door, his usual stillness wrapped around him like a familiar coat. "They look safer," he added. She smiled, maybe because they're finally home. He walked toward her, slow and unhurried. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It had become something they trusted. "People have been talking," she said after a beat. Malik arched a brow. "Good talking, or the kind that ends in board meetings?" "Both," she admitted, sipping her coffee. "Some of my investors think I'm getting distracted." He didn't reply immediately, just glanced at the painting, then back at her. "Are you?" Claire considered it. "Maybe. But if this is distraction, it's the kind that's keeping me sane." He gave a half smile. "Then it's not distraction, it's grounding." She nodded. "That's what I told them." Malik looked around. "This place, it breathes different. I can feel it in the walls. You built something good here. I didn't build it alone." "No, but you gave it permission to exist." Claire felt the words settle deep in her chest. They walked the wing together in silence. When they stepped outside, the late afternoon light was beginning to slant across the city. Claire hesitated near the parking lot. "Would you come with me to the fundraising dinner tomorrow night?" Malik blinked. "As your date?" "As my guest," she clarified, then added, "but maybe also as my shield. There will be questions, people trying to read between lines that haven't even been drawn yet." He studied her face. "Do you want them to know?" Claire looked away, unsure. "I don't know what this is yet, but I know it matters. I'd like them to see that something matters." After a long moment, he nodded. "Then I'll be there." The dinner was held at the Grand Mayfield Hotel downtown, one of those venues with high ceilings, chandeliers like inverted galaxies, and carpet that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly income. Claire arrived early, dressed in a simple black gown that managed to be both elegant and restrained. She shook hands, exchanged practiced smiles, posed for 2 photos she didn't want, and fielded questions from benefactors who always managed to speak like they were doing her a favor. Then, just as the string quartet began their second piece, Malik arrived. He wore a tailored dark suit, the lapels simple, the shirt collar open, no tie, just enough formality to pass without surrendering who he was. When he walked in, the room didn't go quiet, but Claire felt like it had. She crossed the floor toward him. "You clean up well," she murmured. He smiled. "I miss my boots already." They sat together near the center of the room, surrounded by whispers that they both pretended not to hear. One woman in a red dress leaned toward her husband and said something behind her napkin. A board member from a partnering firm stared too long. But Malik didn't fidget. He didn't shrink. He didn't pretend. He belonged by not trying to. During the toast, Claire stood, lifting her glass. "I want to thank everyone who helped bring the wellness wing to life. But more importantly, I want to thank the people who reminded us what healing actually looks like: quiet resilience, unnoticed effort, and moments of stillness we're usually too busy to see. Tonight, we honor that." She raised her glass. Malik didn't clap. He just looked at her. And she looked back. After the speeches, after the forced laughs and tired appetizers, they slipped away. Not because they were hiding, but because the room didn't deserve them anymore. They ended up walking the Beltline trail behind the hotel, passing quiet joggers, the occasional busker strumming a tune on the bridge. The city was alive, but less loud. Malik slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "You weren't scared in there." "I was," she admitted. "I just stopped giving it power." He nodded. "That's harder than people think." They walked a little further. Claire glanced sideways. "Have you ever loved someone who didn't trust it?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And I've also been loved by someone who wanted to change me first. And it didn't last. Because love isn't supposed to be correction. It's supposed to be shelter." Claire exhaled. "You keep saying things like that, and I'm going to start quoting you in investor briefings." He chuckled. "Just put it on a tote bag. Sell it in the wellness wing gift shop." She laughed, but there was something behind her eyes now. A pause. "Malik, what if we're too different?" she asked. He stopped walking, turned toward her. "We are different, but not in the ways that matter." Her voice softened. "You don't care what people say about me, about us." He looked up at the skyline, then back at her. "People talk because they're afraid of quiet. You and I, we live in the quiet. That makes them nervous." Claire stepped closer. "Then let them be nervous." She didn't kiss him, not yet. But she stood close enough to feel the steady rhythm of his breath, and he didn't move away. The wind picked up gently, swirling leaves along the path behind them. "I'm not asking for forever," she whispered. "But I want to see where this goes." Malik nodded once. "So do I." They walked on, 2 silhouettes moving deeper into a city that no longer felt quite so big. And above them, the night sky stretched wide and calm, like a canvas just waiting to be painted. The following Saturday, Claire stood in her penthouse kitchen, barefoot, hair pulled into a loose bun, humming softly as she spooned pancake batter onto a griddle. The window above the sink was cracked open, letting in the soft breeze from Peachtree Street far below. She hadn't cooked breakfast in years. Not like this. Not because she had to impress anyone, or prove she was normal, but simply because she wanted to. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee, and every few minutes, the sound of paws thumped softly against her living room floor. Malik was sprawled on the rug just beyond the kitchen, brushing Rusty, his big golden retriever who had made himself perfectly at home in her condo. 2 of the smaller dogs were curled beside him, like sentinels who had found their way back to her in canine form. Claire poured orange juice into 2 mismatched glasses and called out, "You're getting dog hair all over that rug." Malik didn't look up. "They're shedding love." Claire laughed, a clear, genuine sound. One of the dogs barked in response. She brought breakfast over to the low coffee table and sat cross-legged beside him. "I've had more silence in the last week than I've had in 5 years. Not the lonely kind, the good kind, the kind where I can hear myself think." That's why I keep dogs," Malik said, sipping his coffee. "They listen without asking for explanation. They ate in quiet comfort, occasionally brushing crumbs from their shirts, exchanging glances that said more than words. It wasn't perfect, and that was the point. Claire wasn't trying to curate anything anymore. She wasn't putting on a version of herself that made investors feel safe. She wasn't hiding behind strategy decks and decisive nods. Later that morning, Claire opened her laptop to check her calendar. Her gaze landed on a notification for the annual Whitmore Leadership Summitin event she had hosted for years. Normally, it was a tight schedule of press interviews, keynote panels, and carefully vetted guest appearances, but something in her hesitated this time. She turned to Malik. "You know that painting of the fox you showed Metha curled up inside the burned-out tree?" He nodded slowly. "That one's older. I painted it right after my father died." Claire sat with that for a moment. "Would you show it publicly?" Malik leaned back. "I don't know. Maybe. Depends on why. I want to include it in the summit exhibit. I want people to see it. I want them to feel something that doesn't come with a press release." He watched her carefully. "That's a vulnerable move for a CEO." She tilted her head. "So is falling for a man with paint under his nails and a pack of rescue dogs." He smiled. "Fair point." Claire stood and walked to the window. The city pulsed below, but her gaze was far off, following the horizon. "I used to think success meant being untouchable, that if I let people see the soft parts, they'd use it against me. But I'm realizing something most people aren't looking to attack. They're just waiting for permission to feel something too." Malik joined her at the window. "So you're giving them permission?" She turned to him. "Number, I'm just going first." 3 days later, the summit opened in the main atrium of the Whitmore campus. As attendees filed through security, they passed a temporary gallery Claire had insisted on curating herself. The walls held 7 of Malik's pieces. No placards, no prices, just names. The Weight, Rust Memory, Beneath the Pines, Breath, Home Unseen, Departure, and Still. People stopped. Some lingered. Some looked away too quickly. But Claire noticed something unusual. No one passed without reacting. One woman, a retired nurse who now volunteered in the Foundation's patient support program, stood before Departure for almost 10 minutes before quietly wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. Claire watched from a short distance. Her assistant leaned in and whispered, "Are we sure this is the right tone for a leadership summit?" Claire turned. "This is exactly the tone." That evening, during her opening remarks, she stood behind the podium in a simple navy dress, no jewelry except for a silver ring her mother had left her. Her notes were tucked neatly in front of her, untouched. "I've spent years trying to look like I belong here," she said, her voice steady, clear, "and I've spent just as many years hiding the parts of myself I thought would make people uncomfortable. But lately, I've started to ask, what if the uncomfortable parts are the most necessary?" She glanced at the gallery wall. "What if pain doesn't mean failure but proof that we're still alive?" The room was still. She didn't speak long. She didn't need to. Afterward, Malik met her at the back of the hall. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't trying to fit in. And he didn't need to. When their eyes met, Claire didn't smile. She just exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath through years of applause that never reached her. "Come with me," she said. They stepped outside, away from the catered hors d'oeuvres and clinking glasses, past the back terrace and into the garden she rarely visited. A shallow reflecting pool sat beneath a canopy of lights. Claire crouched and dipped her fingers into the water. "I used to come here before every big pitch," she murmured. "I'd stare at my reflection until I believed the version of myself I had to sell." Malik said nothing, only sat beside her. She continued, "But I always knew, if the water rippled even once, that version would dissolve." Malik reached out, letting his hand brush against hers at the edge of the pool. "You don't have to be still to be real," he said. "You can move. You can change. That doesn't make you false." Claire looked at him, the man who had fixed her radiator without permission, who had handed her a towel instead of praise, who had painted her strength before she could see it herself. "Why me?" she whispered. "Out of everyone you could have helped that night, why me?" He looked at her, eyes quiet and full. "Because you didn't ask for help, but you needed someone to remind you it was okay to take it." She blinked, and the tears came not loud, not dramatic, just the slow kind, like something long frozen had finally begun to thaw. Malik leaned in, and this time she didn't hold back. Their kiss wasn't movie perfect. No music played, no one clapped. It was soft, certain, like coming home. When they pulled apart, Malik rested his forehead against hers. You ever wonder what would have happened if your car hadn't broken down? Claire smiled. Then I would have kept driving, straight past the one thing I didn't know I needed. That night, they didn't make any promises, but Claire placed his hand in hers as they walked back into the building past the whispering guests, past the doubting eye-sand, didn't let go. And for the first time in years, Claire Whitmore wasn't performing. She was simply present. 3 days after the summit, Claire sat in her office high above downtown Atlanta, staring out the window. Rain had begun to fall in soft sheets against the glass, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of gray and light. She hadn't touched her keyboard in an hour. Her calendar, once filled with back-to-back meetings, was deliberately empty. The summit had been a success, no. More than that, it had struck a nerve, opened conversations that hadn't existed in her company for years. Yet something lingered, tugging just below the surface of her calm. There was a knock at the door. She turned to see Diana, her executive assistant of nearly a decade, standing hesitantly. There's someone downstairs asking for you, she said. He wouldn't give his name, just said he used to know your father. Claire's stomach tightened. What does he want? Diana shook her head. Didn't say. Just strange vibe, military haircut, plain clothes, eyes that didn't blink much. Claire closed her laptop and stood. I'll come down. In the lobby, a tall black man in his 60s stood with his arms folded behind his back. He wore a simple charcoal jacket, scuffed boots, and the unmistakable presence of someone used to commanding attention without asking for it. When Claire approached, he gave her a single nod. Miss Whitmore, he said. Yes, do we know each other? He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a photograph. He held it out. Claire took it, frowning. It was an old photo faded at the corners of her father standing beside another man, a younger version of the man in front of her. In the background, a small airstrip, military-grade equipment. I served with your father in Kandahar. My name's Thomas Burke. Claire blinked. He never mentioned you. Burke's voice was even. Your father did a lot he didn't talk about. She stared at the photo, at the image of her father with a smile she didn't recognize. Not the corporate smile, something else. Freer, Burke continued. He made enemies, Miss Whitmore. Real ones. Not just boardroom types. The kind who don't send lawsuits. They send silence. Claire's breath hitched. What does this have to do with me? Burke hesitated. Then, gently, he said, someone's digging around in things they shouldn't. Names. Assets. You. Claire stepped back. That doesn't make sense. Your name came up on a list, he said, along with a few others. Untraceable server, South Carolina IP. They weren't looking for your net worth. They were looking for leverage. Claire's fingers tightened around the photo. Why are you telling me this? Burke's gaze softened. Because your father once pulled me out of a minefield when he didn't have to. And because the last thing he said to me before he died was, protect my girl if I ever can. Claire took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. Do you know who's behind this? I have a guess, he said. But guesses aren't facts. That's why I'm here. She nodded, voice low. You're not the first person who's tried to protect me this month. Burke looked at her with something between respect and warning. Then let's hope he's still standing when this thing unravels. Later that night, Claire sat across from Malik on the worn couch in his studio, lit by the low hum of his table lamp and the occasional flicker of dog movement at their feet. She told him everything about Burke, the photo, the warning. She watched his face carefully, noting how his jaw tightened, how his hand stilled over the mug of tea she'd handed him. Did you know about any of this? She asked. Malik shook his head slowly. Number, but I'm not surprised. She frowned. What do you mean? Malik took a moment before answering. People in power tend to make enemies, especially the kind who smile in public and sharpen knives in private. She looked down. You think I've inherited that? I think, he said gently, you've inherited some things you didn't ask for. But I also think you're not your father. Claire glanced at the painting on the wall behind him she hadn't noticed before. It was abstract, mostly charcoal and steel blue. But in the corner, the outline of a hand reached through what looked like a wall of static. I don't want to be a target, she whispered. Malik nodded. Nobody does. But you don't run from it either. She looked at him, her voice a near whisper. What if they come after you too? Malik's eyes were steady. Let them try. Over the next few days, Claire's life took on a new rhythm. Outwardly, nothing changed: board meetings, press inquiries, scheduled public appearances. But beneath it, something else began to form. Malik started teaching her how to recognize tailing cars. Burke sent encrypted updates through a secure app. Diana, without asking, began screening her calls more rigorously. One afternoon, Claire returned from a meeting to find a small, handwritten note slipped beneath her door. No envelope, just 4 words. You think you're safe? She stared at it, heart thudding in her chest. It wasn't the threat itself that shook her, it was the confidence in its simplicity. She folded it and placed it in a locked drawer. Then she called Malik. That evening, he picked her up in a borrowed truck, dogs already in the back. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere with no cell signal. They drove for an hour, up into the Blue Ridge foothills, until they reached a cabin nestled between dense rows of pine. It belonged to an old friend of Malik's, he said, a writer who rarely used it anymore. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Malik lit a fire while Claire opened the old fridge, surprisingly stocked with bottled water, a few cans of soup, and 6 packs of crackers. She laughed despite herself. This is your idea of off-grid security? She asked. Malik shrugged. You're safe. There's no Wi-Fi, no address posted online, and the nearest neighbor's a retired Navy sniper with a surveillance drone. She raised an eyebrow. Of course he is. Later, wrapped in a flannel blanket on the couch, Claire leaned against Malik's shoulder. The fire crackled softly. One of the dogs rested his chin on her foot. You know, she murmured, I used to think I was building something permanent, something no one could touch. He waited. But now I realize I was just building walls. Not homes, not connection. Just barriers to keep the world from seeing the real me. Malik's hand found hers. And now? I want something different, she said. I want something that can survive the fire, not just look impressive in a magazine spread. He turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. You already started. That summit? That was the first brick. Claire looked into his eyes. Then help me build the rest. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. The silence between them was fuller than most words could carry. Outside, the night grew colder, but inside the cabin, the warmth held. For the first time in weeks, Claire slept without checking the locks twice, because she knew whatever storm was gathering, whatever shadows lurked behind polished glass towers, she was no longer facing it alone. And somewhere in the stillness, beneath the pine-covered roof of a borrowed sanctuary, the fight for her father's legacy began to take a new shape, not as something inherited, but as something reclaimed. The next morning, Claire woke to the rhythmic sound of Malik chopping firewood outside the cabin. She sat up slowly, the warm scent of cedar still clinging to the blanket around her shoulders. The fire had gone low, casting soft orange embers across the wooden floor. One of the dogs lifted its head from beside the couch and gave a sleepy grunt, then lay back down. For the first time in what felt like months, her body wasn't taut with tension. There was no pre-dawn alarm, no inbox waiting to ambush her with problems that weren't hers to begin with. Just quiet. And Malik. She stepped outside, breath visible in the brisk mountain air. Malik didn't hear her at first, though was focused, his arms fluid as he split a log clean in two. She watched him a moment longer than she meant to. Something about the way he moved, steady, deliberate, honest, felt like a language she was only now learning to understand. He finally noticed her and smiled. You sleep okay? I did, she said. Better than I have in years. Good. Firewood's for later tonight. Place can get cold real fast once the sun drops. She nodded, then hesitated. Do you really think they'll try something while we're up here? I don't know, he said simply. But people like that, if they can't find you, they try to flush you out. She crossed her arms. Then maybe it's time I stop hiding. He looked at her, eyes level. Then we do it on your terms. Back in the city, Diana sat in her office sorting through Claire's mail when she came across a manila envelope with no return address. Cautiously, she slid it open and pulled out a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. Play the file, it said. Diana hesitated, then slipped the USB into her laptop. A video file auto-launched, grainy at first. Then sharper. It was security footage. Claire's father. A parking garage. He was speaking with a man white, late 50s, expensive suit, clean-shaven, his face partly turned from the camera. The conversation looked tense. At one point, the man shoved Claire's father hard against the wall, whispered something into his ear, and then walked away. A timestamp in the corner read, 4 days before death. Diana's hand hovered over the mouse. She copied the file immediately and called Claire. "I need to show you something," she said. "Right now." Claire met her at the downtown office later that evening. The rain had returned, slicing down in sheets against the lobby windows. Diana ushered her into the conference room, locked the door, and dimmed the lights. She pressed play. Claire didn't breathe for the first 30 seconds. Then, "Who is that man?" "I ran facial recognition," Diana said, already opening another tab. "His name's Marcus Velman, CEO of Velman Equity Holdings." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "They tried to buy out my father's company in '09. He refused. Said their funding sources were dirty." Diana nodded. "Well, it looks like they didn't take no kindly." The two women sat in silence for a long moment. Then Claire said, "We take it public." "Are you sure?" Diana asked. "This puts a target on your back, bigger than before." Claire's voice was calm. "It's already there. I just refuse to pretend it's not." That night, back at Malik's studio, Claire stood before a canvas. He'd offered it to her quietly, respectfully after noticing how often her fingers twitched as she stared at his art. She hadn't touched a brush in years. Not since college. Not since the world convinced her creativity was a liability in business. Now, the brush felt heavier than she remembered, but not in a bad way. Malik stood a few steps behind her, not saying a word, letting her be. She dipped the bristles into a soft charcoal gray and made the first stroke across the white, then another, and another. Shapes formed nothing precise, but expressive, a city skyline, a pair of hands reaching from two separate rooftops, a streak of blue between them like a bridge, or maybe lightning. She didn't know what it meant yet, but it felt like truth. Malik stepped beside her. "That's good," he said quietly. Claire turned to him. "Do you always say that? Or only when you mean it?" He smiled. "I don't lie about art. Or people." She looked back at the canvas. "I think I forgot who I was. Somewhere between quarterly reports and investor calls." "You didn't forget," he said. "You just got buried." The following morning, Claire returned to her building for the first time since the summit. Cameras flashed as soon as she stepped from the car. Her security detail, now tripled, flanked her on both sides. She wore a black coat, simple heels, and no makeup beyond what was needed to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She walked straight to the media podium. Behind her, a large screen displayed a still image from the video her father's face. Bruised, cornered. "2 nights ago," she began, "a file was sent anonymously to my office. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions, not just about the nature of my father's death, but about the network of power that has operated unchecked in this city for far too long." Gasps fluttered across the room. "I will not be intimidated," she continued, "and I will not stop until those responsible are held accountable, matter their wealth, their title, or the office they hold." Malik watched the live stream from the studio. A dozen dogs sat quietly around him, as if sensing the importance of the moment. When Claire finished her speech and walked off camera, he turned to his easel and uncovered a half-finished portrait. It was of her, not the polished CEO version, not the press kit photo, but the version he saw late at night, barefoot in the kitchen, holding tea in both hands, listening more than speaking. He dipped the brush in a streak of amber and whispered to himself, "She's not buried anymore." And that night, Claire's phone rang. It was Thomas Burke. "They know you're moving against them," he said. "They'll escalate." "I'm ready," she said. "No, you're not," Burke said firmly. "But you will be. I've arranged something. Meet me at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't bring anyone, especially not him." Claire posed. "Why not?" "Because if they're watching you, he's already a liability. We don't want them using him to get to you." She clenched her jaw. "Then you'd better teach me how to fight like him." Burke chuckled a low, gravelly sound. "You've already got something more dangerous than his fists." "What's that?" "Your conscience, and a voice that people believe in." She didn't respond. just ended the call and stood in the quiet. Her reflection stared back at her from the window glass. Not the woman she used to be, not yet the woman she would become, but something in between. And for now, that was enough. The sun had barely begun to rise when Claire stepped into the warehouse on the edge of the riverfront district. The air inside smelled like dust and cold steel. Overhead, old fluorescent lights flickered as if struggling to stay awake. Thomas Burke was already there, standing near a long table cluttered with files, a laptop, and something covered by a dark cloth. She closed the heavy door behind her. "You said don't bring anyone." He looked up. "And you listened. That's progress." Claire stepped closer, her heels echoing in the vast emptiness. "I didn't come here for jokes." "No," Burke replied, pulling off the cloth to reveal a sleek black case. "You came here because you're about to go to war, and war doesn't wait for speeches." He opened the case. Inside was a simple black handgun. Next to it, a folded sheet of paper with bullet points, names, addresses, connections. Claire stared at the gun. "I'm not doing this with violence." Burke met her eyes. "Then you need to be prepared in case it finds you." She exhaled. "So what's the plan?" "We leak the video," Burke said. "But not just online. We send it to every investor, every board member, every journalist who still believes the truth matters. They'll try to silence me." "They already are," Burke said. "What you do next decides if they succeed." He slid a tablet toward her. On the screen was a photo of Marcus Vellman, taken 2 nights ago at a private dinner with city officials. Claire narrowed her eyes. "He doesn't even flinch." "Men like him don't have to," Burke replied, "until someone makes them." Back at Malik's studio, the house was unusually quiet. The dogs were still dozing, curled up in their usual corners. Malik sat on the back porch, sketchbook in hand, but he wasn't drawing. His gaze was distant, eyes fixed on the horizon as clouds rolled in from the east. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "I'm safe, but we're moving forward, no matter the cost." He typed a quick reply. "I'm with you, always." Then he stood, walked inside, and began gathering supplies: charcoal, paint, several finished pieces. He opened a cabinet in the hallway and pulled out a canvas wrapped in plastic. It was the one he hadn't shown anyone, yet the one he'd painted years ago, before the studio, before the dogs, when the world felt colder. It was a portrait of a man crushed by silence, not beaten or broken but erased. He stared at it now, running his fingers along the edges. "Time to bring this out," he murmured. Later that evening, Claire arrived at the city courthouse flanked by Diana and 2 security guards. Protesters lined the sidewalk, some holding signs calling for justice, others with slogans mocking her campaign as a PR stunt. Police officers stood between the crowds and the marble steps. Inside the chamber, a hearing was underway, an emergency ethics review triggered by the leaked video. Cameras rolled. Microphones waited. Claire stepped to the podium. Her voice was steady. "3 weeks ago, I believed the worst thing that could happen to me was failure. Now I realize the worst thing is silence. My father tried to protect something, this company, this city, this principle, and they killed him for it." A murmur rose in the chamber. The council chair tried to interject, but Claire continued. "We can't fix this by pretending it didn't happen. We can't buy our way out. And I won't let his death be reduced to a footnote in someone's balance sheet." She paused, scanning the room. "I know some of you here are complicit. I also know not all of you are." A moment of breathless quiet followed. Then, from the back row, an elderly woman in a blue hat stood up. "My son worked with your father," she said softly. "He told me your dad saved the pensions of 200 workers by refusing that buyout. He said your dad was the only man in that room who didn't flinch." Claire blinked back sudden tears. "I remember him," the woman added. "He used to say, if you lose your name, you lose everything." The chamber fell still. Claire stepped back from the podium. She didn't need a vote. The truth had already taken root. That night, Malik met her near the edge of Lake Merritt, where a local art fair was setting up early booths. He'd secured a small corner stall under a tent with soft lights and unframed canvases. Claire approached quietly, her eyes roaming across the paintings. "Did you do all of these?" He nodded. "Most. A few were from before the studio, before the dogs." Her fingers stopped on one image, a portrait of a young black boy sitting on cracked concrete, his shadow taking the shape of wings behind him. It was powerful, unapologetic. "I've seen this before," she whispered. Malik raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "In a gallery downtown. Years ago. They didn't list the artist." He smiled faintly. "That was me. I used a pseudonym." Claire turned to him. "Why hide?" "I didn't think my voice mattered." She shook her head. "It does. It did." He looked at her, eyes filled with something he hadn't said aloud. "And yours?" Claire stepped closer. "I'm still learning how to use it." They stood in silence a moment. Then Malik reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I want to show the world what I see in you," he said. "And I want to see myself the way you do," she replied. By week's end, major outlets had picked up the story. Headlines ran, "CEO takes on corruption after father's mysterious death," "Whistleblower video sparks investigation into Velman equity," and "Anonymous artist behind viral portrait revealed as Claire's ally." Some board members resigned quietly. Others went on leave. And Velman? He called for a press conference. But the morning of the event, as he prepared to speak, protesters outside chanted Claire's name. They held up copies of the video, copies of Malik's art, signs that read, "Justice is not for sale," and "We remember the silenced." Velman's face paled as he watched the footage loop on screen behind the podium. He didn't finish his speech. He didn't speak at all. Back at Malik's studio, Claire stood in front of his easel once again. This time, she was the one holding the brush. Her blazer hung on a nearby chair, and her sleeves were rolled up. "Think this one's ready?" she asked. Malik crossed his arms, studying the piece. "It's bold, honest, yours." She smiled. "Feels good not to hide anymore." He stepped behind her, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "You were never hiding, just waiting for the right reason." Outside, the dogs barked excitedly. Someone was knocking. Claire opened the door to find a young intern from her company, holding a package. "There's been an anonymous donation," the girl said, "for the community center your father helped build." Claire opened the envelope inside the box. No signature, just a note. Some debts should be paid in silence, but some voices deserve to echo. She looked up at Malik. "I think this is just the beginning," she said. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. Claire stood alone in the center of her late father's office. Sunlight filtered through the slatted blinds, painting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Everything was exactly as he had left. This favorite leather chair slightly tilted toward the window, the antique clock still ticking faintly on the bookshelf, and the faint scent of cedar and old books lingering in the air. But for the first time, she wasn't haunted by the absence. She felt his presence in every detail. Her phone buzzed. A text from Diana. "Board vote tomorrow. They're nervous. You have them cornered." Claire replied simply, "Good. Let them squirm." Then she slid the phone into her coat pocket and crossed the room. On the desk, there was a sealed envelope labeled in her father's handwriting. "For Claire when it's time." She hesitated for a moment, her fingers trembling slightly before she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. The words were short. "If you are reading this, you've already done more than I ever could. I wasn't brave enough to tell the truth. Be braver than me. Don't just fix the company. Change what it means to lead." Claire folded the note and held it to her chest. "I will, Dad," she whispered. "I promise." That evening, Malik arrived at the Community Arts Center, where a mural unveiling ceremony was already in motion. Children ran around the small courtyard with chalk-dusted hands, and volunteers handed out hot chocolate and donuts. At the far end of the courtyard stood the newly completed murala soaring tribute to workers, dreamers, and those who had been cast aside. At its center, the silhouette of a man holding up a broken column, surrounded by people of every race and age helping lift the weight together. Claire arrived a few minutes later, wearing a simple gray coat and scarf. The crowd parted for her, murmuring quiet thanks, pats on the shoulder, and the occasional firm handshake. She looked over to Malik, who stood by the mural with paint still on his knuckles. "You finished it," she said, her voice full of quiet wonder. "We did," he replied. "You gave them something to believe in." She stepped closer, studying a small detail tucked into the lower corner of the mural, a golden dog with its paw gently touching a boy's shoe. She smiled. That one's for waffles, Malik said. He insisted. The mayor arrived unexpectedly, flanked by two staffers. Cameras clicked. Claire turned and straightened her back. She was ready for another political dance. But instead the mayor extended his hand. I've reviewed the footage. What you exposed took guts, he said. And if you're still willing, we'd like your help rewriting our ethics policies. Claire blinked, surprised. You want me to help rebuild the rules? Not rebuild, the mayor said. Redefine. Later that night, back at Malik's studio, Claire sat at the dining table flipping through a stack of community letters, some handwritten, others typed. Testimonies from former employees, local business owners, and even retirees. One letter read, I didn't believe people like you could exist anymore. I'm glad I was wrong. Another, my son saw your speech and said he wants to be like you instead of a YouTuber. That means something. Malik entered with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one down in front of her. You've become something bigger than just a CEO, he said gently. People see you now. She took a sip, eyes glistening. It's terrifying, but it feels right, like I finally stepped into the light. Malik reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wrapped package. I made you something. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a painted wooden box, hand-carved with small symbolic images, open eye, a bridge, a broken chain. On the lid, in gold ink, were the words, For when you forget who you are. She ran her fingers along the edges. It's beautiful. It's yours, Malik said. For the moments when doubt comes. The next morning, Claire entered the boardroom. It was the same room where she'd once felt like an imposter, surrounded by polished egos and glass smiles. But now, she walked with calm confidence. Diana followed at her side, a silent pillar of support. The board members were already seated, some stiff, some sheepish, a few with faces hard as marble. Marcus Velman was absent. His seat at the end of the table remained pointedly vacant. The chairwoman stood. Miss Leland, we've received your motion. This meeting is to vote on the removal of Mr. Velman as CEO and to consider your proposal for a revised leadership structure. Claire nodded. Before we vote, I'd like to say something. She walked to the front of the room, looking each person in the eye. This company was built on trust, not just financial trust, but the belief that we stood for something better than backroom deals and buried truths. That trust was shattered when we chose silence over justice, when we protected power over people. That ends today. She paused. If you're voting to preserve comfort, vote no. If you're voting for truth even when it costs something, vote yes. The room fell quiet. One by one, hands rose. Yes, yes. A hesitant nod. Yes. When the final vote was cast, the chairwoman looked down at the tally and then up at Claire. The motion passes. Marcus Velman is hereby removed, effective immediately. Interim leadership will be appointed pending further internal restructuring. Claire exhaled, slowly. A wave of emotion threatened to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down just for now. There was still more to do. That night, Claire and Malik returned to the small hill behind his studio, the one overlooking the city lights in the distance. They sat together on an old quilt, sipping tea and watching the skyline. It doesn't feel real yet, Claire admitted. You didn't just win, Malik said. You changed the rules. I never thought I'd have someone like you beside me when it happened, she said, turning toward him. You made me see things differently. He smiled. I just reminded you of what you already had. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. It's not over, she whispered. There's still the fallout. Lawsuits. Media backlash. There will always be more battles, he said. But now you're not fighting them alone. A gust of wind stirred the leaves around them. Somewhere below, the dogs barked once, then quieted. Claire lifted her head, looked into Malik's eyes. I want to build something new, she said. Not just the company, but a way of living, a way of leading, and I want you to be part of that. He didn't respond with words. He just leaned forward and kissed her softly, but with the weight of everything they'd come through. It was not the kiss of triumph. It was the kiss of truth. And it was enough. Back at the studio, a light flickered on. Waffles padded across the floor, sniffed at the front door, and barked once. Malik opened the door. Outside stood a boy, no older than 10, holding a battered sketchbook. "Are you the man who painted the wings?" he asked. Malik knelt. "I am." The boy looked down at the ground, then held out his sketchbook. "Can you teach me?" Malik glanced back at Claire, who was watching from the hallway. She nodded. "Yeah, kid," Malik said softly. "I think we can start right now." The morning after the vote, Claire stepped out of Malik's studio into the cool breath of dawn. The world looked new, not because anything outside had changed, but because everything inside her had. She walked to the corner bodega near the edge of the arts district, grabbed 2 coffees, and lingered outside while steam curled into the early morning air. A woman passed her with a tired nod. Then a city sanitation worker, recognizing her from the news, raised his chin in quiet respect. She didn't wave. She just smiled and tucked it all into her chest like a secret blessing. Back at the studio, Malik was already awake, feeding the dogs and humming a blues riff under his breath. "You snuck out," he said when he saw her. "Just for coffee and peace. Find either?" "A little of both." He handed her a napkin to dry the mist clinging to her scarf. She looked around at the space still cluttered, chaotic, alive with color and motion. It was the opposite of every boardroom she'd ever sat in. And yet, it felt more permanent. That afternoon, a reporter from the Herald Tribune called asking for an exclusive. They'd already seen the vote go viral. Everyone wanted to know how the Iron CEO had taken down the golden boy Marcus Velman. "No comment," Claire said firmly. This wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. But the media wouldn't rest. There were headlines now. CEO breaks silence justice in the boardroom. The woman who took down Velman. Even Beauty and the Brave. The artist and the executive. Claire hated that one. They wanted a fairy tale. But this wasn't a love story, not really. It was a reckoning. The mayor's office followed up on their earlier offer. Claire was appointed to an ethics committee overseeing municipal-private partnerships. It was mostly dull paperwork and long meetings, but it gave her influence. And more importantly, it gave her access. She began pushing for structural reforms that would create real oversight both in the city and in the corporate sector. Malik supported her, even when she came home late, exhausted and frayed at the edges. "You can't fix everything," he said once, brushing a hand over her back as she collapsed onto the sofa. "But maybe," she murmured, "I can make it just a little harder for people to hide." Meanwhile, whispers began to surface about Marcus. Nothing concrete, no official charges. No statements, but things had shifted. Anonymous sources claimed he'd fled to a villa in Switzerland. Another report suggested the Department of Justice had opened a quiet investigation. Claire didn't care where he was. He was gone. That was enough. One evening, she and Malik attended a gallery opening where one of his pies signed under his pseudonym hung among the featured works. It was the portrait he had painted of her, though no one else would recognize it as such. The brushwork was delicate but strong, the face obscured by shadows, but the posture unmistakable, defiant, still, upright. "She's waiting," a woman near them said to her date, not realizing Claire was standing close enough to hear. "Waiting for justice, or maybe hope." Claire turned away, her throat tightening. Malik offered her his arm. "You gave people a face to fight for," he whispered, "and now they're finding their own." But not everyone celebrated her. The backlash was steady in the background. Some accused her of orchestrating a power grab. Others claimed her relationship with Malik was a distraction, a PR stunt. One anonymous columnist wrote, "Powerful women who fall in love with street artists are either foolish or crafting a brand. Either way, it won't last." Claire didn't respond publicly, but Malik noticed the way she gripped her coffee cup harder that morning. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then added with a dry laugh, "Apparently, I'm now both a manipulative genius and a gullible romantic." "That's balance," he joked, but she didn't laugh. "What if they're right?" she asked. "What if I did all this just to prove something?" Malik didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We're all proving something, Claire. But the difference is you gave something back when you did." A week later, Claire returned to her father's house, the one she'd ignored for so long. It still felt cold, despite the spring light spilling through the windows. She wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects, his medals, his books, the family photos that hadn't been updated since she was in college. In the back closet, she found something she hadn't seen since she was a teenager, a photo of her father as a young man. shaking hands with a black union leader after signing a worker protection agreement. It startled her. She remembered him as strict, corporate, emotionally distant. But here he was smiling, sleeves rolled up, standing for something. Maybe she hadn't known everything. Maybe she never would. But perhaps she had inherited more than she thought. That night, Claire sat at the small desk in the corner of Malik's studio and began drafting a proposal. Not for the board, not for the city, for a foundation, one that would use diverted executive bonuses to fund grassroots arts programs and community leadership incubators, especially in underfunded neighborhoods. "We'll call it the Bridge Fund," she said aloud, and Malik, painting nearby, looked over. "Because bridges carry weight," he said, "and connect what's been kept apart." "Exactly." By the end of the week, she'd already secured the first donation from a former board member who had voted against her but now claimed her speech had shifted his spine. More followed, quietly at first, then in waves. She was building again, but this time, not for profit, for permanence. The next Sunday, Claire took Malik to meet her mother. The visit was tense at first. Her mother, ever formal, ever skeptical, sat across from Malik with a polite but unreadable expression. But then Malik complimented her rose garden, and within 10 minutes, they were discussing fertilizer brands and soil acidity, as though they were old friends. Later, in the kitchen, her mother took Claire aside and said, "He's gentle. That matters. Don't let the world make you forget that matters." Claire blinked. "You approve?" "I approve of how you look at him," her mother said. "You haven't looked that unguarded in years." On the drive home, Claire rested her head against the window. "I used to think power was the only way to stay safe," she murmured. "But it turns out trust is stronger." Malik reached for her hand. "Then let's build something worth trusting." They passed a mural that had been defaced of Malik's earlier works. Spray paint scrawled across the faces. Claire winced. "We'll repaint it," Malik said quietly. "They can't silence color forever." "No," she whispered. "But they'll try." That night, they sat in the studio while waffles snored at their feet. Claire opened her laptop and read the latest message from a girl in Detroit. "I watched the video of your board speech. My school is run by the same kind of people. I'm not CEO material, but I'm going to try. Thank you for showing me it's not crazy to care." Claire didn't cry. Not this time. But she let the words sit inside her like a lighthouse in a storm. Because the work was just beginning. And the silence? She had shattered it. The summer air was thick with the smell of ash. It started with a phone call of those midnight rings that made your stomach sink before you even picked up. Claire had been asleep on the couch beside Malik, a late-night documentary still flickering on the muted television. The call came from a local officer. Not a friend, not a stranger. Just a man with a badge and a task. "Ma'am, there's been a fire. The studio he's Placiet's. Gone." She didn't scream, didn't move. Just held the phone until Malik stirred beside her. Eyebrows furrowed. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low, still sleepy. Her mouth opened, but the words sat on her tongue like lead. Finally, she whispered, "You're home. It's gone." By the time they arrived, the structure was nothing more than a scorched frame silhouetted against a rising dawn. Smoke still curled from the bones of the building. The fire chief stood nearby, helmet tucked under his arm, his face solemn. "No injuries," he said. "But it was intentional. We found accelerants. Someone meant for this to burn fast." Malik walked forward without a word. The earth beneath his feet crunched with broken glass, charred paintbrushes, collapsed canvas frames. Claire followed silently, unsure if she should speak, touch him, or just vanish. He stopped in front of what used to be his easel. All that remained was the twisted metal skeleton and a smear of color on the floor, blue and ochre fused together in the fire like stubborn memory. Claire reached for his hand. It was cold, stiff, but he didn't pull away. "I should have known," he murmured, voice hollow. "They couldn't erase the boardroom, so they erased my walls." "It wasn't about art," she said, her own voice shaking. "It was about you, about what you stand for." He nodded slowly. Same difference. The arson investigation would drag on for weeks, full of denials, dead ends, and quiet political interference. Claire called in every contact she had. So did the Bridge Fund's legal team. But nothing stuck. No arrests. Just vague apologies and empty reassurances. "We're doing all we can, Miss Warner." In private, she fumed. In public, she remained poised. And Malik? He didn't rage. He didn't shout. He just worked. He borrowed a corner of Claire's apartment, turning her sunroom into a makeshift studio. The dogs adjusted quickly. So did the chaos. But it was different. Tighter. More haunted. Then, one night, Claire walked in from a long meeting to find him sitting in the middle of the room, surrounded by blank canvases. Just sitting. Eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They burned everything, but they didn't take the hands." It was a quiet sentence, but it rang louder than any speech she'd ever given. The next day, Malik began again. Not with brushes, but with charcoal, rough sketches, harsh lines, angles that bled onto the page like confessions. Claire watched from the doorway, arms folded, heart caught between heartbreak and awe. Then came the call from the Whitney. They'd seen the media coverage, seen the boardroom clip, seen the fire. They wanted to host a solo show. Malik laughed at first. "I've never even shown my face," he said. "They don't know me." "They don't need to," Claire replied. "They've seen the truth." And so it began. A series of long nights and early mornings. New canvases, bolder strokes. Claire helped him catalog the work, write the artist's statement, prepare the titles. One by one, they reclaimed the story that had almost been lost. The night of the opening, the gallery was packed. Art critics, old board members, foundation partners, and ordinary people from the neighborhood, they all came. Some recognized Claire immediately. Some recognized the work, but no one expected the man behind it. When Malik walked in simple black suit, no tie, shoes still dusted with charcoal, room hushed, not because of fame, but because of gravity. He carried silence like a storm cloud, heavy, but earned. Claire stood beside him, her hand lightly brushing his. "You ready?" "No," he replied, "but we'll do it anyway." They walked through the gallery, past massive portraits that pulsed with defiance and sorrow. One wall featured a diptych on the left, a faceless boardroom drowning in gold. On the right, a barefoot child holding a mirror up to it, cracked but intact. The plaque beneath it read, "Accountability." In the center of the room hung the largest piece, a reimagined version of the painting he'd once made of Claire, this time, with her face fully visible. Not softened, not glamorized, just real. The lines around her eyes, the curve of her mouth, the steadiness in her spine. It was called The Witness. A reporter approached, recorder in hand. "What message do you hope people take away from tonight?" Claire turned to Malik, letting him answer. He met the reporter's gaze and said simply, "That silence doesn't mean surrender, and kindness isn't weakness. Some things burn, others endure." The quote ran in the New York Times the next morning. But more importantly, it ran across hundreds of social posts, community papers, and printouts pinned to school hallways. It wasn't just a gallery show anymore. It was a reckoning. Months passed. The Bridge Fund expanded. New chapters opened in Philadelphia, Oakland, and Houston. Claire split her time between cities and continued pushing for legislation around executive accountability. Malik painted, taught weekend workshops for teens, built a new studio from salvaged wood and donated stone. On their anniversary 1 year since that broken-down car and wary glance, Malik surprised her. They drove out of the city, past the edge of the freeway, down a winding gravel road. At the end of it stood a small cabin tucked between trees. He led her inside. On the wall above the fireplace hung a new painting. Claire, eyes closed, forehead pressed gently to his. Around them, light. Dogs at their feet. Peace. "I built this for us," he said. "Not because we needed it, but because we earned it." Claire turned toward him, blinking back tears. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he whispered, kissing her temple. "Just stay." They sat in silence for a long while, wrapped in each other's warmth. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees like an old song. Later, Claire stood on the porch and watched the sunset fade into the dark. She thought about the fire, about the boardroom, about the girl in Detroit and the woman who whispered at the gallery and the old judge who once said power was its own kind of silence. And then she spoke soft, certain, just for herself. "We are not what we destroy. We are what we rebuild." And behind her, Malik said, "Then let's keep building." Because love didn't arrive with grand gestures or headlines. It was in the quiet, the ashes, the brushstroke after devastation, and in the hands that reached for one another anyway.